Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're jumping right into a massive, incredibly complex geopolitical shift happening right now in southern Syria. We're going to be looking at some extensive data and newly published reports that detail aggressive military expansion, unprecedented infrastructure projects, and some incredibly deep environmental impacts that are literally altering the region's map. If you appreciate these detailed slide-driven explainers of the most critical global events, do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss our latest updates. We have a ton of ground to cover today, both literally and figuratively, so let's get right to it. Okay, 1,672. Let that number sink in for a second. That is not just some random passing statistic. That is the staggering number of violations reported strictly inside Syrian territory between August 2025 and May 2026. This data comes straight from a newly published report by the Syrian Monitoring and Research Organization, the Sijil Centre, which was recently cited by Middle East Eye. According to their comprehensive documentation, what we're looking at here is a rapid, intense, and heavily calculated campaign of Israeli military expansion across the southern Syrian border. And researchers are arguing that this campaign is fundamentally and maybe permanently altering the historical landscape of the entire region.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. The 1974 ceasefire breach. 2. The strategy of silent strangulation. 3. Bases, gates, and land. 4. Environmental devastation. 5. The Smart Border Project. And finally, 6. International responses and accusations.
Section 1. The 1974 ceasefire breach.
To really understand the gravity of these events, we have to start with the macro context. Following the recent regional war and the sudden fall of the Assad government, the long-established boundaries in this area basically fractured completely. The report describes this as the first major Israeli ground breach since the end of the 1973 war, violently piercing a UN-monitored demilitarized zone that had actually been respected since 1974. Within literally the first 48 hours following the collapse of the Syrian government, Israeli forces reportedly crossed the ceasefire line and captured roughly 350 square kilometers of Syrian territory. Just to put that sheer scale into perspective, that is an area larger than the entire island nation of Malta, swallowed up in just 2 days. This massive capture stretches all the way from the snowy peaks of Mount Hermon in the north, plunging straight down to the Yarmouk Basin and Dara to the south. It effectively consumed huge sections of a demilitarized zone that is over 75 kilometers long. Looking at the timeline, you can clearly see how this unprecedented land shift actually unfolded. The documented violations began a really sharp escalation in August 2025. But March 2026, that was the absolute boiling point of the entire campaign. In that single 31-day period, Israeli forces carried out more than 321 distinct military operations. That included 121 airstrikes, targeting alleged military aircraft and weapons depots, working right alongside ground incursions driving deep into central areas like the town of Nawa. By May 2026, though, the strategic focus reportedly shifted. They moved away from that aggressive forward momentum and started heavily consolidating these newly occupied zones. Moving on to Section 2, the strategy of silent strangulation.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is when we shift our focus down to the ground level, we see a totally deliberate pivot in military doctrine. The Sijil Centre report notes a stark move away from traditional, large-scale ground invasions, marching armies and massive armor columns. Instead, what has emerged is a highly tactical, sustained strategy that researchers are calling silent strangulation. So what does that look like? It means a high-risk operational tempo made up entirely of localized acute harassment. We're talking constant, unpredictable night raids, sudden localized territorial incursions, and the establishment of these heavily restrictive military checkpoints that completely choke off civilian movement. It's a calculated method of putting intense, unbearable pressure on local populations and isolated fighters, achieving territorial dominance without the global optics of a massive traditional war.
And when you map out exactly where this silent strangulation is taking place, the data is just incredibly concentrated. According to an internal mapping document reviewed by Middle East Eye, a staggering 80% of these documented violations are concentrated entirely within Quneitra province. So why is Quneitra the main focal point? Well, the report points to a really vital combination of its dense civilian population and its highly strategic terrain. They're operating within this tightly packed 15-kilometer triangular zone extending from the old ceasefire line. By controlling this specific area, military forces can exert maximum psychological and logistical pressure on the local infrastructure, essentially dominating movement and neutralizing any organized regional resistance.
Which brings us to Section 3, bases, gates, and land. So, how exactly do you permanently hold a strategic and highly populated zone like Quneitra? Well, you completely rewrite the physical geography. The Sijil Centre reports that Israel has rapidly established 9 entirely new military bases deep inside southern Syria, and a 10th is likely already under construction. And the direct impact this has on regional land control and the local civilian toll is absolutely severe. Just consider these data points. In the area of Jabhat al-Khalshab, 2,500 dunams, which is about 600 acres, of essential forest and agricultural land were entirely bulldozed just to expand a localized military post into a fortified regional base. Over in Al-Hamadiyah, occupation forces reportedly demolished 16 separate civilian homes in a span of just 50 days. They displaced 12 local families for the sole purpose of clearing sightlines to build a new surveillance center. And further down the map, previously quiet elevated sites like Tel al-Ahmar al-Gharbi have been permanently converted into these advanced military hubs, equipped with heavy firepower and long-range surveillance systems peering straight into the Syrian interior. Connecting all these sprawling new bases are what the report classifies as 4 highly distinct military gates. You can see the logistical breakdown right here. Abu Ghazar is designated specifically for the rapid deployment of armored vehicles. Al-Asba is structured to provide direct access to local villages. Al-Razaniya secures the route to key regional intersections. And the Majd al-Shams gate is strictly reserved for heavy military convoys and supply chains. Now, it's absolutely crucial to understand that these are not merely border crossing points. They function together as a systematic, interconnected geographical security belt. By holding that elevated terrain and strictly controlling these 4 specific arteries, the occupying forces ensure permanent, unbroken surveillance and total fire control over the entire operational zone.
Next up, Section 4, environmental and agricultural devastation.
While all this new infrastructure fundamentally alters the map, the aggressive methods used to actually secure that new map are severely impacting the Earth itself. Imagine looking up at military aircraft circling relentlessly for nearly 4 hours, dispersing these unknown, cloud-like substances right over the exact fields you rely on to survive. This is the grim reality highlighted in the documentation regarding some highly concerning aerial operations. In early January 2026, witnesses in southern Quneitra reported these exact prolonged flights, spraying unidentified chemical substances over vital farmland and grazing areas. By late January, these systematic aerial spraying operations had dramatically expanded, covering a massive 65-kilometer stretch along the ceasefire line, straight into northern Quneitra. Now, the Syrian Agriculture Ministry stated that while initial tests didn't reveal acute immediate toxicity levels, they couldn't actually identify the specific chemical compounds being used. However, the Sijil report strictly noted that similar clearing operations previously documented on the Lebanese border heavily utilized a military-grade herbicide that is classified internationally as probably carcinogenic. The environmental and agricultural consequences on the ground were immediate, absolute, and catastrophic. Literally within days of these extensive aerial campaigns, massive swaths of green areas simply withered and died. The report notes that 3,500 dunams of crucial grazing land and 1,500 dunams of old-growth forest were effectively destroyed in southern Quneitra alone. That is well over 1,000 acres of total ecological collapse. For the local farmers whose entire survival, generational knowledge, and economic livelihood depend absolutely on agriculture and livestock, this deliberate destruction of grazing land is a fatal blow. When your pastures die overnight, generational farming practices are immediately halted. It effectively starves out the local microeconomy and creates an almost insurmountable daily challenge for residents simply trying to survive near this newly enforced buffer zone. Let's zoom out a bit for Section 5, the Smart Border Project. If the ultimate goal here is long-term, uncontested control, the infrastructure has to inevitably evolve from physical concrete bases to fully automated surveillance systems. $1.7 billion. That massive figure represents Israel's recently announced Eastern Border Security Barrier. This is not some minor fencing upgrade. It's an unprecedented 500-kilometer wall project designed to stretch endlessly from the southern occupied Golan Heights all the way down to the desert dunes north of Eilat. It represents a monumental, heavily funded effort to form a continuous, permanently fortified military line that seeks to alter the historical boundaries of the region forever. But as you'll see, this project goes far beyond just a simple wall of concrete and steel. The Sijil Centre intensely analyzed an $80 million deal made under the public pretext of civilian landmine removal. Their analysis concluded this was actually a strategic cover for building a highly advanced, fully integrated, smart border.
We're talking about permanent topographical changes, heavily outfitted with a staggering arsenal of autonomous systems. This includes sweeping AI-powered sensor grids, continuously circling Optimus surveillance drones, automated ground robotics patrolling the perimeter, and permanent anti-drone frequency technologies. Tied directly to the newly paved SOFA 53 military road, this tech transforms a historic landscape into a permanently automated security corridor, overseen around the clock by the newly formed 96th Gilad Division.
Finally, Section 6, International Responses and Accusations.
So the crucial point is we have to look at the immense geopolitical fallout of this expansion. How are these actions actually being interpreted by the experts monitoring the crisis? Well, Hamza Ghazban of the Sijil Centre states directly that the systematic destruction of agricultural land and the continuous, suffocating military pressure amount to an attempt to silently displace the population by destroying their livelihoods and income sources. From the explicit perspective of this monitoring organization, these actions are not merely defensive maneuvers. They indicate an underlying criminal intent aimed at executing forced demographic changes, resulting in incredibly severe human rights impacts throughout the entire region.
Conversely, we have the firmly stated goals of Israeli leadership, who have become increasingly open and vocal about their territorial ambitions in the wake of this regional shift. Far-right finance minister Bezalel Smotrich publicly declared a political phase taking the crown of Mount Hermon and, at minimum, the buffer zone, while Defense Minister Israel Katz stated unequivocally that Israel will not withdraw a single millimeter from Syria. The newly published report actually ties these bold territorial ambitions directly to recent April 2026 legislation. That legislation is specifically aimed at moving 3,000 settler families into the occupied Golan Heights by the year 2030, largely by aggressively expanding the Katsrin settlements. In response to this massive territorial shift, international diplomatic channels are really heating up with some severe formal allegations. Syria's permanent representative to the United Nations, Ibrahim Olabi, recently brought an extensive list of formal accusations directly before the UN Security Council. The grave charges against Israeli forces include the systematic terrorizing of local civilians, carrying out undocumented enforced disappearances, initiating routine and destructive home raids, and committing ongoing, flagrant violations of the long-standing UN separation zone. While historically the Syrian governmental response to the southern border region has been somewhat limited in its global reach, the sheer, undeniable scale of this current military expansion has forcefully pushed these severe human rights allegations and UN resolution violations directly onto the center of the international stage. Which leaves us with a truly profound issue to ponder as we watch this situation unfold. With billion-dollar smart borders, systematic technological land seizures, and the integration of AI and automated robotics into territorial control, how will these advanced technologies permanently redefine international conflict zones going forward? The unprecedented scale of the Sijil Centre report doesn't just show us a border dispute. It shows us a terrifying future of border enforcement that is heavily automated, completely autonomous, and highly devastating to the local populations trapped in its path. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. If you want to keep understanding the most complex shifts in our world through clear, structured analysis, make sure to subscribe to the channel for our latest updates. I'll see you in the next one.